Well, before we give Mercedes too hard a time today about their strategy, the strategy in which Lewis Hamilton finished second in the Mexican Grand Prix to Max Verstappen, bear in mind that this was predicted by Pirelli, the Mercedes strategy, to be almost as quick as the quicker strategy. So Mercedes chose to start Lewis Hamilton on the medium and then switch to the hard on a one-stop strategy, which Pirelli predicted would be slightly slower, but almost as quick as the two-stop strategy, starting on the soft tyre and then medium-medium. Problem was, they didn't take into account how good that Red Bull RB18 is on race day in the variables when they're managing the tyres as well as Max Verstappen does. And he managed to get through on the soft-medium strategy on a one-stopper. Absolutely brilliant drive by Max to do that, I thought. And I think for most of the race, up until about two-thirds of the way through, Mercedes were predicting that Max was going to have to stop again. And then towards the end, of course, they were just hoping that he was going to stop again, and by then it was too late. Lewis came onto the radio at about the right moment, about two-thirds of the way through the race, and said, "Hey guys, are we on the wrong tyre?" "No, Lewis, we're not. We're confident this is the right tyre," came the response. As they normally do, don't they? Okay, affirmative, understood, front of the car's falling off. Anyway, that's just another bit of the Formula One vernacular these days. So, Max made those tyres last. Sergio Perez did too in the other Red Bull, not quite as effectively as Max, but did a very good job to hold off George Russell. We'll talk about how he got past George Russell in a second. But so it made it a Red Bull 1-3 on the podium, and we had the mariachi version of the Formula One theme song. I don't know if it's got a name yet, which was a nice touch. We had that in qualifying as well. And we had Max crossing the line to win his 14th Grand Prix this season, and thus becoming the first man ever in the history of the sport to do so. Of course, we have to take into account how many races there are in a season now and all the other changes that occurred in Formula One to make real comparisons. But the highest number prior to that was 13, held by Michael Schumacher and Sebastian Vettel. So two pretty good guys there to be one notch ahead of their Max. But he was very calm and cool about it afterwards and just saying, yeah, what a great car it is, and how much fun he had today. Well, I didn't actually say how much fun he had today. He said it was a hard race, obviously. But yeah, it was a great race, actually, I thought. Tense throughout. There was a moment when the virtual safety car came out. And Lewis got on the radio afterwards and said, I seem to lose a lot of time behind the VSC. So we can see there, first of all, let's look at the gaps at the bottom. Lap 65, it was 12.8. Then it swelled suddenly to 16.4 when the virtual safety car came out. Lap 67, still under virtual safety car, back to 14.3. And when it went in, it was 14.4. So Lewis is kind of right that the gap went up by about 2 seconds purely in the virtual safety car period. Now the question is, was there anything untoward there? Let's have a look at how the laps worked out in terms of their sectors. So you can see lap 66, so they're under virtual safety car conditions now from sector 2 onwards. Max did a 29.0, and normally they're doing low 22s. Max did a 29.0 and Lewis a 32.3. And you can look at the two sector times there, 29.2, 29.1 is virtually the same in sector 1. That was a normal sector 1. Then they got the virtual safety car, and Max in sector 2 slowed to a 31.9, and Lewis to 35.6. And that's because obviously they're on different parts of the circuit. And bear in mind they're 12 seconds apart, and there's quite a lot you can do through those fast S's. So that's where that gap came from. It just kind of helped Max because he'd got through the S's at that point, whereas Lewis was about to go through the S's. Sector 3, they're going through the stadium, 27.7, 27.5, no difference there. Same on the next lap in terms of the first and second sectors. And then the safety car, virtual safety car goes away, and they're doing 21.4, 21.5, same speeds in the third sector. And that's where it came from. It came just from the gap. In effect, it was the gap that Max had created, or Lewis had dropped behind Max, basically separated the S's, and it was the S's when the virtual safety car came in. So that's where that came from. And Lewis was kind of right to make the point, but obviously when you see it like that afterwards, you see exactly how it panned out. But let's just get back to the start, because that's what we talked a lot about yesterday, that turn 1, bearing in mind how relatively easy it is, given how long the run is into turn 1, for the car behind the leader to get a tow and maybe to do something under braking. and Max just made the perfect start from the pole. I don't know what his system is, and need to ask him one day whether he thinks about it a lot or whether he just sort of, obviously he's got all the stuff from the engineers, he's coming up on the formation lap and everything else in terms of the burnouts and the rear tyre temperatures. There's all that technical stuff. But then there's also the other human element, which is, am I very relaxed and chilled here, and am I going to get it perfect, or have I overthought it and am I going to make a mistake? But he didn't, and it was of all the starts this year, you had to make a critical start. It was that, I think, and he did it perfectly off the line on the clean side of the road. George Russell made a pretty good start too from where he was, and he was very close to Max and looking at sort of doing things like this. But Max was okay in terms of being able to protect the lead, get down the inside. George was then on the outside, and in a way that was George's undoing, because then Lewis went to the right of George and didn't, he gave George lots of room and let him go, and George is now on the outside of Lewis going through the first right-hander. But as they go to the left, Lewis just stays there, does a really good job on the outside of the left hand, and then there's another right before that short straight or shortish straight. And Lewis then just turns in perfectly, doesn't run George wide by any means, but uses quite a lot of road. George has no alternative but to sort of run out into the runoff area on the left, and all of a sudden Lewis is up to P2. And Sergio Perez is then watching this, sees George losing traction, obviously, as he's on the runoff area, and does a beautiful job on that straight that follows to pass George under braking on the outside. I mean, this is George Russell that Sergio Perez passed on full tanks there with the tyres not up to temperature. And I think that also points to the strategy that Red Bull employed, which was the start is a critical part of this race. And if we do lose position to the Mercedes at turn one, it could become a very difficult day for us. So above all, we want to give Max, in Max's case, we want to give him the maximum opportunity to brake as late as he may need to brake in order to have the grip he needs into turn one to get the lead. That was that one. And then we'll start Perez on the softs for a similar reason, because he needs to try to get past the Mercedes if he can as well, and he's going to need all the braking power he needs into that first corner. Bear in mind that the energy going through the tyre covers this year is less than it's ever been, and it's going to be nothing in a couple of years' time. Bear in mind that the tyres are quite cold when they're hitting the brakes for the first time. Being on that soft tyre really made a difference, and that was a great call given the layout of the Mexican Grand Prix circuit, how long that straight is, I thought, by Red Bull. So, but the point was they then were on the red tyre, the soft tyre. So how long could they make that last? And they did a very good job, as they would. I mean, Max out in front, not having any of the turbulence or debris of any car having to follow any other car, could look after his tyres pretty well, and he got a lot out of them. And Lewis was able to stay, I'm just looking down at my notebook here, within 2.23 seconds, 2.1 seconds, 2.6. He was doing a really good job behind him, and both of them were then pulling away from Sergio Perez, who's starting to struggle a little bit getting the soft tyre to run as well as they are on Max's car. So they brought Perez in first and put him onto the medium, which would have given a lot of comfort at that point to Mercedes, because they would have been thinking, yep, soft, medium, early stop for the medium, then they're going to have to make another stop for the medium. And on that basis, they continued to think in terms of their strategy as a one-stopper. But Max continued to do a really good job, and he got a couple more laps out of the tyres than Sergio. So let's have a look now at the out laps. Max going to the medium tyre, so he's got the grip of the soft tyre off the line. Now he's going to the grip of the medium tyre. He's doing a 41.3 on his out lap. Lewis on the hard tyre, much more difficult to get grip from, a 43. So there's already a swelling, and that was magnified over the next 2 or 3 laps. You can see the differences in the sector times. There was 2. Sector 1, 48.2, Lewis 49.1, Max 31.9 in Sector 2, Lewis 32.5, Max 21.1, 21.3. Going back to the sector times at the start of the race, when Max was on the soft tyre and Lewis was on the medium, it was interesting to see how really quick Lewis was in Sector 1, mainly because he was in a DRS tow from Max, so he wasn't losing anything. And anyway, he was only about 5-6 kilometres an hour slower than Max when he was in free air, not in DRS late in the race. That was the difference in top speed. So Mercedes just continuing to show that this is a great circuit for them in terms of low drag and their car really not having any real penalty in terms of top speed. So Lewis was always really strong in Sector 1. Sector 2, which is all about the high speed change of direction, when you're starting to get that Adrian Newey downforce to work finally in the Red Bull, Max was usually 1 or 2 tenths quicker than Lewis. And then Sector 3, very, very evenly matched on the tight Sector 3 through the stadium. So a really, really interesting battle between the two of them, accentuated by the different tyre choices. So the question now, of course, was whether or not Lewis or Mercedes could push Red Bull into having to make that second stop. And as I say, because Perez came in quite early, I don't think they thought till well after half distance that Max was going to go the full Grand Prix distance on a one-stopper. And Lewis and George both went onto the hard tyre, and both of them got on the radio after about 10 laps to say this tyre doesn't feel as good as the soft, which is a logical point. Of course it wouldn't feel as good as the soft because it's got nothing like the same grip, but of course it's got the longevity. And the reply always came back, yeah, it's going to be like Miami or wherever, it's going to pick up grip, don't worry, it'll work for us at the end of the race. And we know we can get to the end. And there were a few comments made like that, which obviously was for the benefit of Red Bull to hear as well, to see whether or not there was a sensitive point there for them. And of course, both drivers did a pretty good job. George and Lewis got a lot out of that hard tyre, as much as they could probably get out of it, I would think. But then, of course, that didn't take into account the fact that both Red Bulls were going to run all the way on that medium tyre. So let's have a look at why Mercedes went for that tyre choice rather than do what Red Bull did and go for the soft tyre versus the medium. They would have been thinking that is what Red Bull are going to do because historically they've got great tyre management, they've got great aero efficiency, so why wouldn't they go for the fastest strategy? But that strategy, as detailed by Pirelli, was a two-stop strategy. And what was attractive to Mercedes was the one-stop element of starting on the medium and then going to the hard. And bear in mind, they hadn't run much of the medium, but they did quite a lot of running on the hard in FP1, particularly with Lewis in FP1. I think he did 12 laps on the hard tyre in FP1. The medium never really came into play for Mercedes. They seemed to focus almost exclusively, I think it was exclusively, on the soft tyre in FP3. Bear in mind, we had all that tyre testing, the Pirelli tyre testing in FP2. So they had no experience on the medium tyre, but they knew that they could get off the line with it, and they knew that it was going to be a half reasonable tyre, but they did have a lot of confidence in the hard because they'd run it and they knew the hard. Red Bull, of course, have got a massive amount of history behind this car, of how it performs in a number of different ways. And obviously, Mexico is very different from every other circuit in terms of the thin air and less downforce. But nonetheless, they know that car so well. They know that car so well in terms of its balance and how it works and what Max can do with the car if, say, the left front starts to go off, the soft left front goes off. Whereas Mercedes don't have that same backlog of information because they'd never really been in this sort of position. Okay, Zandvoort, they're at the front, but it was a slightly different thing. And they were never going to be the quickest car or almost as quick as the Red Bull at Zandvoort. But here, for the first time this year, they actually had a race-winning car, a potential to win the race. And I think that was new territory for them. And so they went for, you could argue, it was quite an aggressive strategy, actually, a one-stopper, bearing in mind that they have had situations where they've eaten the tyres pretty severely, and they went through that. And I think we shouldn't give them too hard a time for doing that. Because the alternative would have been, we'll go soft, medium, medium. I don't think they ever felt that they could go soft, medium as a one-stop strategy. I just don't think Mercedes thought that way. And I think they always felt they were going to need to come in for a second stop. Whereas the Red Bull didn't. And they obviously felt that before the race. And that was what won it for them ultimately. It was the knowledge of the car, the understanding of the car, how to manage the car, and the confidence that Max could do that consistently and run at exactly the right rate and manage the tyres as well as he did. I mean, his consistency, except when he was in traffic, of course, but his consistency when he was in free air was unbelievable. Sector 1, Sector 2, he was replicating it lap after lap after lap after lap. It's just absolutely stunning to watch. And it was just a case study on how to do it right, really. I mean, it was just a superb performance. And if you just go back to the graphic of the outlaps, you can see I put in the top speed at the bottom there. The average top speed when they're not in traffic and they don't have DRS that was the difference. And it's, I think you could say, well, 6 kilometres an hour, but in reality you'd say, wow, it's only 6 kilometres an hour, bearing in mind where Mercedes have been all year. And that is the story of the Mexican Grand Prix. Only 6 kilometres an hour between Lewis and Max. And that meant, of course, that when he was in DRS, he was actually quicker. And that's why he was usually quicker in Sector 1. Max, as I say, Sector 2 usually had it, and then pretty even in Sector 3. So it was a really, really evenly matched race. And and to have them both on different strategies that kind of work for their cars was pretty cool as well. And in the end, it was a 15-second win for Max Verstappen. But Mercedes can say, wow, we beat Ferrari by, 42 seconds. Lewis was ahead of Carlos Sainz by the end of that race. Ferrari finished 5th and 6th, beaten soundly by Mercedes and Red Bull. And they weren't that quick in a straight line, 3.22, 3.23 on average, Carlos Sainz and Charles Leclerc. Interestingly, bear in mind, Charles Leclerc was complaining about his engine seemed to be down on power yesterday. There was no power unit change. The only thing they changed on both cars before the race in Parc Fermé was the upper rear wing main plane. Interesting. I wonder whether or not there was some sort of cracks or maybe flexing, I don't know, or maybe it was affecting Carlos's top speed and Charles' top speed, and they suddenly realized it might be doing the same to Carlos as well. And today they weren't that bad in terms of top speed. 3.22 is the same as Lewis and George, and that was only 6 kilometers slower than Max. Now the problem with the Ferrari was how much wing they had to take off in order to have that top speed, which meant the car was unbelievably skittish. And there were some moments there with Charles where you just thought he dropped it again. And I glibly said after Friday practice, oh, Charles, he makes a few mistakes on Friday and hit the barrier, and when he was doing the Pirelli tyre test, actually. But of course, that was a pointer of where Ferrari were at. They weren't running much downforce. And that car, when it was going over curb and it was getting up and it was getting air underneath it, it was just all over the place. And incredible car control from both drivers on the high-speed S's there, but way, way off the pace. And unusual for Ferrari to have been hit that hard. We saw from Spa onwards how Mercedes have been catching Ferrari, and then suddenly they were ahead of Ferrari, and now in Mexico they were massively ahead of Ferrari. It probably won't be the same in Brazil or Abu Dhabi. Ferrari should be able to come back in normal atmospheric conditions and what have you. But here in Mexico, it was just like, whoa, the difference between the Mercedes and the Ferrari was incredible. So let's have a look at some of the other results. P7, Daniel Ricciardo, great drive for him, McLaren. They put soft tyres on the McLaren, 26 laps to go, and Daniel loved those, and he drove really well. And there was even a sort of classic Daniel moment with Yuki Tsunoda when Yuki came across him. Daniel's down the inside, punted him off. Retirement for Yuki, unfortunate for him, of course, but he looked like Daniel Ricciardo. Again, really good drive by him on the soft tyre. I mean, to do that and to make the soft tyre last as well. Really, really good performance. Helped, got to say, by the retirement of Fernando Alonso when his engine blew in the Alpine. But nonetheless, don't take it away from Daniel. Esteban Ocon, 2 seconds behind Daniel on hard tyres, long run on the hard tyres in the Alpine. So pretty close between McLaren and Alpine, but that switch to the soft tyre really made the difference, and they didn't do that with Lando. He stayed on the hard tyre as well. So he finished 9th, and Valtteri Bottas, who made a terrible start and lost a lot of time early on, finished 10th in the Alpha after that really, really good qualifying performance. Great shame. I should also mention that George Russell, when Fernando's engine blew, classic George, this is going back, flashback to Zandvoort now, when he came in and said, got to get new tyres, stay out, no, coming in, came in and got the tyres. Same thing, I've got debris, terrible debris, I've got to come in, may have a puncture. Because he hated those hard tyres. He was trying to persuade Merck to let him come in and put some soft tyres on even then. But they said, no, stay out. So he did. But then I guess they did bring him in because he had enough gap to be able to go for yet another fastest lap, a George Russell speciality now. Coming in, soft tyres. Championship point for George. Extra championship point on the soft tyres. And Daniel, as I say, was on the soft too. So all in all, in terms of strategy, in terms of the Pirelli tyres this weekend, you've got to say Pirelli actually added to the weekend enormously because the tyres all worked pretty well. Yeah, you could say, the hard tyre obviously didn't have the grip of the medium and the soft was pretty good. And that's, all credit to Pirelli. I don't know how many people out there are saying that, because normally when things don't go wrong, Pirelli don't get much of a mention. But I think they deserve a big mention for what happened today, because we saw a wide variety of strategies. And if you look at the finishing results, I mean, it's just multicolored: yellow, white, yellow, red, black, yellow, yellow, red, white, white, white. You know, that's pretty good. That's pretty healthy, isn't it? And it means that they got the balance about right in terms of what Pirelli can do for Formula One and the whole business of having to run two different compounds. Just to reiterate the point, though, I really do think Mercedes felt Red Bull were going to have to stop again. And Lewis drove this race of trying to push Max as hard as he could, but knowing that he had to get to the finish on this hard tyre. And, Max in that situation was just, I'm still blows my mind, actually, how well he drove, considering he had to make that tyre last and he had the pressure from Lewis, who was really quick today in that Mercedes. So it was easy to see Max get out of the car, not sweating, 14 wins now, the handshakes, the podium, the whole thing, and just say, oh, another win for Max Verstappen and Red Bull. But to me, this was a really, really good win, because the Red Bull wasn't quite the Red Bull that it normally is, because of the density of the air, as we know, and it didn't have the same downforce. It had a lot, obviously, but it wasn't the supercar that it's been of late. And Mercedes were very near, because they didn't have the normal drag penalty. So good race, really enjoyed that. And of course, it never got to the point where there was even a discussion about what Sergio Perez was going to have to do to win this race, because he did well to finish P3. I mean, again, from Red Bull's point of view, it would have been really nice had he got past Lewis and then kind of held up Lewis a bit. And normally you would imagine that's what would have happened, given that he had a bit of top speed advantage and it was Sergio in Mexico. But it was interesting after the race to hear Sergio say whenever he got near Lewis, and he got right with him, and most of the time he's within 2 or 3 seconds, he said he just couldn't do anything. He's lost so much downforce. And that's an interesting comment, isn't it? Because if you are F1 and you've designed these 2022 cars, this new regulation, to make easier to follow cars and therefore to have more overtaking, you would imagine that it would help Sergio Perez in a Red Bull in Mexico. But it didn't. He couldn't get past a Mercedes because he couldn't get near enough, because he was losing so much downforce at the front. So that is an interesting message, I think, to go back to the formulators of the regulations, because in theory, they didn't work this weekend. We did see some passing, but in terms of what the regs could have done, I mean, for Red Bull not to be able to pass Mercedes with DRS in Mexico, means there was a lot of stuff coming out the back of that Mercedes. Maybe it's a one-off because of the thin air, and maybe on other circuits that turbulence isn't going to be quite as marked. But it's an interesting aerodynamic subject, is it not? That in thin air, the Mercedes generates a lot more turbulence, maybe, than other cars do on other circuits at whatever it is, sea level. So yeah, there we are. Max Verstappen, Lewis Hamilton, Sergio Perez, George Russell, the 2 Ferraris. Carlos Sainz doing a good job, actually, to lead home Charles Leclerc, who had that shunt on Friday, so maybe that sort of put him on the back foot as well. Daniel Ricciardo, P7, Fernando Alonso, engine blow-up, and Daniel Ricciardo also accounting for the retirement of Yuki Tsunoda. Esteban Ocon, P8 in the Alpine, Lando Norris, 9, Valtteri Bottas, P10 in the Alfa Romeo. Good stuff. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed all that. Thanks for watching, and I'll be doing a live stream debrief on Twitch on Monday. Not exactly sure when. I think I'll put it in for around 5:30, I think. I should know, shouldn't I? But it's around that sort of time. Please join us with comments, questions. I learn as much from you guys as anybody else, and we're having a lot of fun on those live streams now. And you can always watch them retrospectively on the channel anyway. They're up for a couple of weeks anyway. So yeah, do that. In the meantime, thanks for watching, and see you again soon.